Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. So we did Hey last time, and I guess we're going to Vav. I'm not sure if we did the Bet Yosef though. So I'm going to read it. So it says like this over there in the Bet Yosef. Elu yerakot sheyotzim bahem. So it says these are the vegetables that we can use from maror, as we said, right? So where is this coming from? The Mishnah. It says from Perek Kol Sha'ah, Lametet Amud Aleph. אלו ירקות שיוצאים בהם בפסח, בחזרת, ועולשין, וצמחה, בחבינה ומרור. So these are the 5 types of vegetables that you can use for maror. We already described, right, last week what they were. So I'm not going to go over it now, but so it says ben lachim ben yivashim. Right? It says there you can use it whether it's dry or moist. אבל לא kivushim, but not pickled, right? ולא shilukim, and also not boiled, לא במושלים, וכולן מצטרפים לכזית. And they all combine to give you the size of the kazait, because that's the amount you have to eat. Kazait of the maror. Kazait is pretty much like a standard, size for all kinds of eating. So the maror is kazait, the matzah is kazait, the afikoman is kazait. They're all kazait, these things. So that's what we're talking about here. So then he says, also we can use, right, as we said, the stalk. So we can use, right, as it says in the Gemara, you can use them whether they're moist or dry. And Amar Rav Chasta lo shanu ela kelach. So Rav Chasta said that's only regarding the stalk. Aval alinach ilachim. But right, when it comes to the leaves, they have to be moist. And yevashim lo. But yevashim cannot use, right? You cannot use dry leaves. The dry leaves is like what we use for spices, things like this, right? You have in your spice cabinet, right? So those, have a different taste altogether. They don't have the original taste anymore. So you don't want to use that, that's for sure. So that's the idea. שהבן אותם דקדק שבקלח יוצאים לו בשורש וכך כתב סמג. So Rabbeinu Tam says, right, that you have to use the stalk, but not the root, right? So the root you should not use of any of these vegetables. And by the way, there was one rabbi who told me that because of this, right, what the Ashkenazim do, that they use horseradish, is not good. Why? Because that is the root of the plant, right? So you don't want to. Rabbi Tam says you shouldn't use the root. Anyway, right, as we said, that they had a problem with availability probably in Europe, so they did the best they could according to what was available there. Umash katav v'ikar mitzvah hazot bechazeret, right? And as the Torah said, right, that the main mitzvah is to use romaine lettuce, chazeret. Sham begimara, right? It's over there in the Gemara, Lamed Tet Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Yoshaya mitzvah bechazeret v'lo yadati lama. So he says, right, this rabbi, that the mitzvah is to use romaine lettuce, but he says, I don't know why it's better to use that one. I'm not really sure. So he says, I'm sorry. V'lo yadati lama ishmitu Rambam. He says, I don't know why the Rambam left that out. That's what he says. Right. So what does that mean? He didn't write that the best one is romaine lettuce. Ulai shehu mefaresh mitzvah nami bechazeret. Perhaps he says because he explains that mitzvah is to use, right? He also holds that you should use romaine lettuce. Afa pi shehi metuka. So he says, right, that even though romaine lettuce is the sweetest one of them all, it's not really so bitter at all. As I told you, right, in Israel especially, right, the romaine lettuce they grow there is like kind of sweet, whatever. So, what's the point of using something sweet, right? That's the, Sheim Tokaven, Ba Merirut. It doesn't really have much, bitterness, the romaine lettuce. V'hakach matzati Rabbeinu Yerucham. So it says, then I found, right, Rabbeinu Yerucham writes, Shekatav, mitzvah bechazeret, ve'eno tzarich lachazer achar amaror, yoter, v'zeh mevo'ar kemo shekatavti be'abar samak. So he says, right, this rabbi, that also, that you should use the romaine lettuce. So don't look for anything else, right? In other words, once you got romaine lettuce, stick with that. So then he brings another source for this, right? Which is the Samak, Katab, the Kedivya Rabbeinu, right? He writes like Rabbeinu the Tur, Veze Lashon V'nagu Leolam B'chasa Dechas Rachamana Alan. So he says, right, that the custom is to use romaine lettuce. Now here's the thing, right? That romaine lettuce in Hebrew or in Aramaic, right, is called chasa. And until this day, by the way, in Israel, that's what they call it. They call it chasa. So, except that now they use it, they write it with a hey, and now here it's written with an aleph, right? So, what's the difference between the aleph and the hey? What do you call it? The aleph is Aramaic, and the hey is Hebrew, something like that. So he says, what's the reason why they use that one? The chas rachamana alan, because the word chas, right, in Hebrew means like mercy. So God was merciful upon us. So therefore, right, that implies that quality of mercy, God's mercy. And this is the reason why he says that's the reason why we should use romaine lettuce, right? פורפי בלעז אך מכל מקום טוב לחזר אחר חסה מטעם שאמרנו אפילו לקנות בדמים יקרים. Look what he says, right? Interesting. So he says, right, that if we don't have chasa, if we don't have romaine lettuce, we use porpui, right, which is one of the other ones, right? Whatever, I don't know. It's like a foreign language, this word. So I don't know exactly what it is, but anyway, right, he says, but nevertheless, right, it's a mitzvah to try to find romaine lettuce if you can. So he says, even if it costs a lot of money, right, the merchants jack the price up, because they know the Jews want to buy, right, romaine lettuce, so they jack up the price. But nevertheless, he says, right, you should try to buy it if you can. So, Umash katav ve'im en lo chazeret yachazer achar rishon rishon. So then the Torah writes that if you don't have chazeret, if you don't have the romaine lettuce, then look for the other ones, right, in the order that it's listed. Each one has its own priority. It's all relative, right? Ken katua got maimon. That's what it says in Hagot Maimon. Kata hakolbo says the kolbo im en lo chazeret ikach she'ar yerakot. So it says if he doesn't have lettuce, romaine lettuce, right, then he should take some other vegetable. Kagon olshin, right, which as we said, right, olshin is endives, right? So v'chalchavina, right, the gargira, the other ones, going down the list, right? וקצת נוסחאות כתוב גם כן כוס ברטה, ואיני יודע טעם לא לגרגירה ולא בכוס ברטה. All right, so he says, right, that there are some books say kuzbarta, right? And kuzbarta, by the way, is what we call today cilantro, and that's not really maror, right? So therefore, he says, I don't know who put this thing in here, right? So really, we shouldn't use that. That's not really the proper thing to do. Somebody put in a wrong thing there. Okay, so anyway, right? V'agur katuv pasak mari molin. So this rabbi says, right, that this rabbi paskind, misha en lo chazeh tikach maror shehu la'ana. Oh, so he says, right, that if you don't have romaine lettuce, right, so then take la'ana, right? And what is la'ana? It's like a bitter grass. It's a bitter herb, right? But it's not one of the five that we mentioned, right? I think I think in Hebrew I'm sorry, in English it's called wormwood, lana, whatever. I don't know, whatever. That's my memory. My memory. That's what it brings me back to. Uval Sefer Agoda. So he says this book he writes, Katab Sheikach Tamcha, right? So he says take Tamcha, right, which is Rafano, right? So Tamcha is like horseradish, if I'm not mistaken. As we said, right? That's what the Ashkenazim use. But it's very bitter, Mm. By the way, one of the problems also with horseradish, if you use that, is that it's very bitter. So the problem is that you have to eat a kazait, and it's hard to eat a kazait of that stuff because it's so bitter. My rabbi used to kid around, joke around, Maran. He used to say, you eat that stuff, you might have to call an ambulance, because if you eat a kazait of that stuff, because it's so bitter, it may cause you to have a problem, right? The health problem there, right? So it says, right, but here's the thing, right? That you shouldn't think, by the way, that when we say horseradish, we're talking about the stuff in the bottle, that we use, to eat gefilte fish with together, the Ashkenazim, right? That we like gefilte fish. That horseradish cannot be used for Passover, for the mitzvah. Why is that? Because it's pickled. You see, that's the thing, right? So you have to use a raw horseradish, right, which is really bitter. You can't use the pickled stuff. So that makes it even harder, right? That's the thing. So I remember when we were in Georgia, in those days, we used to use horseradish like the Ashkenazim. I don't know why that is. Maybe because the Ashkenazi rabbis brought that in, or maybe it wasn't available, right? The romaine lettuce there. I don't know exactly what the reason is. But anyway, right? So it's an Ashkenazi custom. But the truth is, that nowadays, that they came back to Eretz Israel, the Ashkenazim, a lot of them have started to use, romaine lettuce because they know that it's better, and it's available in Eretz Israel, in abundance, right? No problem. You can get as much as you want, right? Until up to the ceiling you can get if you want, right? Romaine lettuce, and they grow it there, so it grows like in warm climates, so it's perfect for Eretz Israel. Okay, so. But here in America, they grow like in California, places like that, right? And by the way, the Israeli one is much better. Can't compare one with the other. Like everything else. Okay, so right, just one example. So anyway, right, going back to what we said. Um, so he says you should use the leaves and not the roots, he says, right? So that's exactly what they were not doing. They were using the roots, right? Which is not good. I guess they didn't have whatever, I guess it wasn't available. Ve'arav David Abu Drehem, so he says this rabbi כתב תמכה בערוך מפרש שהוא קרדוש. Belas, so they're giving all kinds of these foreign names, which I have no idea what they are. But anyway, right, we know what it is. Tamcha is horseradish. ויש אומרים שהוא מרביב בלז, מרור הוא חזרת של יער שהיא מרה אף על פי כן חסם מצווה מן המאוחר. So right, he brings all kinds of options here, but bottom line is romaine lettuce is the best choice pick, right? And so try to get that if you can. Okay, everybody agrees to that, pretty much. Okay. Good. So then he brings the issue of the charoset, right, which we said is a remembrance of the mud, right, that they used to work, the slavery in Egypt, right, the whole thing. It's a remembrance of that. So it's a reminder, whatever. So he says, right, what's the source of that? Perek Arbe Psachim, right, which is in Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph in Masachet Psachim. Tanan, there's a Mishnah there. It says, Rabbi Eliezer Bar Tzadok Omer, this rabbi says, mitzvah mecharoset, right? It's a mitzvah to have charoset. B'Gemara, my mitzvah, Rabbi Levi Amar zecher tapuach, right? So he says, what mitzvah is there to have charoset? So he says it's a remembrance for the apple, right? The apple trees that they had it's a whole discussion, right? It's a whole story about that in the midrashim that talk about the Exodus, right? And the Jews being in Mitzrayim in Egypt, they say that there was like apple trees, that they used to, right, procreate under those, the Jews, and have children, all kinds of stories like that. I'm not going to get into the whole story now, right? Otherwise, it's going to become like a story time, right? Whatever. It's all Torah, Baruch Hashem. But we're going to stick to halacha more. Right? We're not going to get into midrashim now. If we can do we can do another class for that. That's not the purpose of this class. So anyway, that's the way it goes. Rav Yochanan Amar Zecher Latit. So Rav Yochanan says no, it's because of the mud, right? That they were working in the mud. Amar Abaye Yilkach Tzarich Lekiyua v'Tzarich Lesmuche Lekiyua Zecher Letapuach Lesamuche Zecher Latit. Right. So he says, right, that therefore it should have a little bit of right, the charoset should have also a little bit of bitterness to it, right? A little sour, right? Sour flavor there, mixed in a little bit there, right? What do they call that, right? The pungent, right? Yeah, it should be a little pungent there, the charoset. That's why I remember, when my parents, right, they make every year like a big batch of charoset. My father, when he was alive, he used to make it, so he would add like some pungency to it. What would he add? He would add some oranges, to make it a little bit more pungent flavor. And by the way, that makes it taste really, really good. It shouldn't be like totally sweet. That's what I'm trying to tell you, right? It shouldn't be like some honey. You know what I mean? Just that's too much. It should have a little pungency there. Sweet and sour, as they say, right? The Chinese, right? The a little bit sweet and sour there going on. Right, so that's the idea. That's the way it should be. That's what he says, and that's a reminder regarding the apple tree, right? Because the apples are not like totally sweet, right? They have a little bit of a pungency to them. The apples, so to remind you of that, and then also, right, it should be like it should have like a muddy texture, like the mud as a reminder of the mud that they had, right? In Egypt, they were working there, right? In the quarry, to make to build for building, right? For building purposes. Okay, good. That's the idea. So let's go on. Right, that's what we said. Right? So Rashi explains, right, this whole thing about the apple tree, right? As I told you, right? They used to give birth over there, the ladies. It was a whole thing over there, giving birth to children. It said, there was no sadness, right, with that. And the Egyptians didn't see, right? They were not able to notice that. Why is that? Because the apple tree was giving them cover. Right? Go figure, right? Whatever. Diktiv tachat tapuach oratich, right? There's a verse that talks about that in Shir Hashirim, right? In the Song of Songs, right? Lismuche latil v'chtosh bo arbe kedei l'shiu av, right? So, as we said, right, it should have like a thick texture to it, like muddy, whatever, as a reminder of the mud, right, of the clay. L'kiyua le'atil bo tapuchim. Right? So he says, right, Rashi, exactly what I just told you, right? You have to put something in there that makes it a little bit pungent. Right? So what does that mean? As we said, apples are a little bit pungent. And also he says wine as well, right? By the way, my father used to put wine also. I remember. He used to put wine. So we add a little bit of wine to make it a little bit pungency there. And other things which are pungent, right? As I told you, right? Some oranges, God knows, whatever, right? A little bit pungency. Okay, that's the story, right? Charoset. So, it shouldn't be too sweet. That's the thing, right? As we said. Okay. ויש טעות סופר בלשון רבנו, וכך צריך להגיע, ומדברים המוציא זכר לתפוח, תכתיב תחת התפוח, וזכר למרור, ואף על גב דתניא כבתי דרבי יוחנן, אם כן לא אבל צריך למעבד זכר לתפוח, נקטינם כהבעיה למצריך. So he says, right, that's the opinion that we follow, right? That we should have a little bit pungency there as well. All right, sounds good. ומה שכתב בשם רבנו יחיאל דהה והאיתה, כך כתב בתוספות פרק 4 פסחים, כך כתב בהגות מימון. So yeah, this one, the truth is, I don't think we read the tour for this. So let me just go back there to the tour and see what it entails. Okay. Yeah, so he says like this, פירש רבנו יחיאל, דהה והאיתה מתחילה עושים אותה עבה, ואחר כך מרככים אותה בחומץ ונותנים בה תבלין, כגון קינמון וזנגוויל הדומים לתבן, זכר לתבן, שהיו מגבלים בו עתיד ונותנים בה תפוח, זכר תחת תפוח. ורתיחה ואגוזים, דכתיב אל גינת אגוז ירדתי ותאנה. Okay, so here we go, right? He's giving you here the whole recipe for the charoset, right? You ready to write it down, the recipe there? You got your notebooks, everybody's got there. So it says like this, right? That how do you make it, right? What's the proper way to do it? There's different variations on this, but this is the Torah way, right? Whatever, right? The Bet Yosef way, the Bet Yosef recipe. Right, so he brings here, I'm sorry, this is not Bet Yosef, this is Tur, right? So Tur brings, right, let me just give you the whole thing over here, right? The whole story. So let me just go from the beginning, right? A little bit before. So it says, Vita Yerushalmi, it says in the Torah like this, right? It's written in the Yerushalmi, It de Avid la Aveh, there are some who make it thick, the charoset, Veit de Avid la Rakan, some of them make it more like, soft, more right, thin, whatever, right, thinned out. Zecher Adam, right, which is a remembrance for the blood. Right, Rabbeinu Yechel. So Rabbeinu Yechel explains the ha v'ha'ita because they're both true. So what does that mean? You do both, right? With charoset. First, you make it thick, right? Osin ota aveh, by making it, very, right, not right. You make it nice and muddy. And then you soften it up. He says you add some vinegar. So there you go, right? He added vinegar too, right, to make it a little bit pungent, as we said. And so adding some vinegar, and that softens it up a little bit, right? So it's not that hard. And then he says we put some spices there. Like what, for instance, right? Like he says, kinamon, right? Cinnamon, v'zangvil, which is ginger, hadomim leteven, right? And there he says they resemble their color resembles straw, right? Whatever. Hay. Okay. Zecher Teben. So it's a remembrance for the hay, right? Shayu megabin bo'atatit. They used to make the mud, right? The clay for the bricks. V'notrin ba tapuach. And they said we put some apples in there. Right? Zecher tachat tapuach oratich, like we just said, right? It's a remembrance of that apple tree. Ve'egozim, right? And then we put some nuts, right? Oh, okay, right. So make sure you got your nuts in there. Tichtiv el ginat egoz yarati, right? So because it says in the verse in the Song of Songs, it says right nuts. So there we went down to the orchard of nuts, right? The tena, and also we put some figs in there. He says, right? Tichtiv atena chanata pagea. So these are all verses from the Shira Shirim, right? The Song of Songs. We get all the recipe from there. That's for the Charoset. Bet Tavshilin, right? Why do we get it from there, by the way? What does it have to do with the Passover? Because it talks about over there about the Exodus from Egypt and how it was over there, how life was there. So it describes all these scenarios that we just mentioned, right? And this is the reason why we take it from there. Okay. Obet Tavshilin, right? And then as we said, right, two cooked dishes. Echad zecher lePesach ve'echad zecher leChagiga. We already spoke about that, right? One should be is a remembrance of the Korban Pesach, and one is for the Chagiga. These are two types of sacrifices that they bring that day. Me'ez min sheyitzah, right? You can use whatever you want for these. In other words, according to Halacha, there's really no prescription for these two cooked dishes. So the truth is, right, that that's a good thing to know, because if you don't have, let's say, like a shank bone or some chicken bone or whatever that you roasted, whatever, so you can use any other cooked dish as well, according to halacha, right? But the custom, as we said, is to use one shank bone and one egg, or chicken bone, right, whatever, leg, whatever, drumstick, something like that, right, and one egg, and that's the whole story there, right? Okay. Good. So he says, ונהגו לקח זרוע רמז לזרוע נטויה, ויש אומרים כשפסח. So he says, as we said, right, that the custom is to take a zroa, which is like the shank bone, right, or some kind of, drumstick, as we said. ויש אומרים כשפסח, שאינו לקח אלא תבשיל אחד זכר לפסח, אבל לא הבית כנגד החגיגה. So he says, there are some who say you should have only one cooked dish, right, not both of them. But the custom is not like that, as you know, right? The custom is to take two. Okay. Good. So let's go to Bet Yosef. Let's see what's going on there. Catch up a little bit. Right. So says Bet Yosef regarding what we just read. כך כתב תוספות, that's what said תוספות, בפרק הרבה פסחים, over there in קט"ז עמוד א', וכך כתבו הגאות מימון, that's what it says also in הגאות מימון, וסמ"ק, right, all these Rishonim, all these earlier authorities, ומה שכתב ונותנים בתבלין, and that what she said, right, that we should put some spices in there, etc., 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 שם בגמרא, וכתב מרדכי בשם הרוקח, it says over there in the name of this rabbi, לכך משימין בחרוסת קינמון וזנגביל, right, as we said, right, we put there, right, cinnamon and ginger and things like this, right, קנה, לפי שאי אפשר לדוכן היטב שלא יהיה בהם חוטים קשים, וזהו זכר לטיט. So he says, because you can't really grind them up too well, these things, they're not so grindable, so therefore, right, it looks like very muddy, very clayish. וזהו זכר לטיט שהיה תבן מעורב עם הטיט, because he says the straw, right, was mixed up with the clay, right, the mud, whatever, so therefore it looked like, very viscous kind of, like very rough. So that's what gives it the rough texture. There you go. So you see, right, that there should be a rough texture there to the charoset. You're getting all the secrets over here, all the recipes. What can I tell you? All right. Where else are you going to get all this stuff? Who else is going to give you? Right, you're not going to find it anywhere else. All this good stuff. So, right, now what we said, right, that you should put some apples in there and nuts, right, as we said, and also figs. כך כתוב בשם בתוספות, it says also in תוספות, שצריך לעשות חרוסת בפירות שנדמים לכנסת ישראל. So it says, in חרוסת, you should use fruits which are compared to the Jewish people in the verses, in the Bible, right? כתבו עוד שם כפלח הרימון, it says, right, regarding pomegranates also, שקדים, right, and also שקדים, which is almonds, שם על שם ששקד הקדוש ברוך הוא על הקץ, right, because Hashem, right, he paid attention to us over there, to finish off this exile. Okay, good. So we got all the good stuff there. Right? What else? What else can you ask for? What can I tell you? So yeah, I think we didn't read this Bet Yosef. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember reading it. So it's a good thing we caught it this time. There's a little bit more here, which I also want to read. So we said, right, that you should have two cooked dishes, right? Where is this coming from? Perek Arve Psachim, right? It's also over there in Psachim, Kufyu Dal Amud Bet, right? So it doesn't really tell you over there which dishes to use. So as we said, right, if you don't have the dishes that are customary, you can use something else, and some cooked dish, whatever it is, right? Whatever you got. So don't think it's the end of the world, I don't have a shank bone, okay, you'll survive, don't worry, it's okay. Well, we'll survive without the shank bone. So then he goes on, right? Umash katav me'eze min sheyotze. Right, so but try to get it if you can, get it, something, to use to do the custom. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Try to get it. You know what the secret is, right? Go early shopping. If you haven't gone yet, right? Go early this week, because otherwise everything will run out. You won't have nothing left anymore. You're gonna have problems if you don't go early. So don't wait till the last minute, right? Don't wait till next week. You're gonna say, well, Passover falls on Monday. I'll do shopping on Sunday. No, Sunday's too late. You're gonna have problems on Sunday, right? If you go Sunday, right? So do the shopping before a little bit, a few days before. So this way, all the supplies will be left there, right? So you're not gonna miss anything, right? The zrizim makdimim, that's what they say, right? That the early birds are the ones who get all the mitzvot. Do the mitzvot early. Okay, good. So then he goes on, right? You can use whatever you want, as we said, any type you want. Sham ika mande amar silka ve'aruza, right? There are different opinions over there in Talmud, which cooked dishes you should use, right? So some say silka, which is spinach, the aroza, right? The ika aroza, I don't know what's aroza. Not sure. Maybe it's rice. I don't know. Yeah, aroza. Could be. Maybe it's like rice. Vika mande amar dag. Some say you should use fish. Oh, right? Ubetza and an egg. Vika mande. There's another opinion that says use two types of meat, right? Chicken, and some right lamb, whatever, right? Two types. The Rambam pasak keman de amar shnei mine basar. As a Rambam paskins, you have two types of meat. Interesting, right? But the custom is not like that now, right? As we said, the custom is to use one meat and one egg. וכן פסקו הגאות מימוניות, that's how פסקינס in הגאות מימוניות, כתבו עוד הגאות מימוניות שכתב הרשב"ם שפירש רבנו חננאל, so he says, right, that this rabbi explained שיש לי כך שני מיני בשר, he also says, right, רבנו חננאל, two types of meat, interesting, צלי ומבושל, right, one roasted and one cooked, interesting, צלי כנגד the why, one is corresponds to the Pesach, which was roasted, Vushal keneged the chagiga, and the chagiga which was cooked. So you should use something cooked. So it says, he doesn't agree with this. So he says because the Tana, right, the rabbi there, Paskins like Ben Tema, the Amar, that he says chagiga nechelet sali, that the chagiga actually is actually eaten roasted, so it's not cooked. So he says, therefore, you should take two types of meat, even if they're both roasted, right? Or both of them are cooked. So it doesn't really matter, right? Bottom line, right? So don't go too crazy about these little details, right? One is roasted, one is cooked. It's okay if they're both roasted, whatever, they're both cooked, whatever. It's okay. You'll survive. You'll be all right. Okay. Good to know, right? Because some people think, that this is like a do or die situation. Oh my God, I don't have roasted meat. It's okay, right? ויש שאומרים כשפסח מוצאי שבת שאין ניקח, right? So some say, okay, so we gotta go back to the tour a little bit. We didn't do this yet. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, so says the tour like this. ויש שאומרים, some say, כשפסח במוצאי שבת, when Pesach falls on Saturday night, שאין ניקח אלא תבשיל אחד. You should only take one cooked dish. זכר לפסח, just for the Pesach, to be remembrance of the Pesach. אבל לא הבית שכנגד החגיגה, but not the second one, which corresponds to the חגיגה. לפי שאז לא הייתה חגיגה, because then he says there was no חגיגה, בא עם הפסח, right? If it was, in other words, if it fell on Saturday night, they didn't bring the חגיגה. שאין דוחה שבת, because it doesn't push aside שבת. ורבנו פרץ כתב, so רבנו פרץ writes, שאין לחוש, we're not concerned about that, כיוון שאינו אלא לזכר בעלמא, because it's just a remembrance, so we're not really concerned about that, says רבנו פרץ. ועד רבא מדקדק בזה, נראה שעושה אותו כמין קדושים ממש. So it says just the opposite, so on the contrary, if you're going to be very precise with these things, it looks like you're doing something like, right, you're bringing all kinds of sanctified foods on your table, which is not good. Okay. וכך כתב בעלי טור, that's what it says בעלי טור, שאל ישנה אדם ואין צריכים להביא מכל, it says you shouldn't change, right? No matter if it's Saturday night or some other night, do it the normal way. להביא מכל אלו לפני כל אחד ואחד, אלא לפני בעל הבית, והוא יחלק לכולם. So it says you don't have to bring everybody, right, their own little Seder plate, right? So meaning what? We have one plate for everybody. אלא לפני בעל הבית, והוא יחלק לכולם, he's going to portion to everybody, right, all these things. לכולם. ונוטל ידיו לצורך טיבול הראשון. So he says you should wash his hands now, right, after okay, so let's see first the Bet Yosef, before we go on to the next one. So it says Bet Yosef regarding this, what we just said, that what's the source for all we just said? כך כתב הראש, that's what it says in the Rosh, מטעם דמהרה יבנה בית המקדש במהרה בימינו. So he says, because, when the Bet HaMikdash will be rebuilt, ואמרו אשתקד מי לא הבאנו זכר לחגיגה. So we're going to say, right, last year didn't we bring remembrance for the חגיגה, even though it was Saturday night? אף על פי שחל 14, even though it fell on, right, the 14th of Nisan, fell on בשבת, שבת, השתא נביא חגיגה בשבת, and now we're also going to bring חגיגה on שבת. כתב רבנו ירוחם שכך נראה עיקר. So רבנו ירוחם seems to agree with this. So, right, that's one opinion, as we said, that we should be careful about that. Now he brings the other opinion, right, which says that you don't even have to be careful about this. It's, not really necessary at all, because after all, right, we're not doing, temple style, right, the sacrifices at this point, at this juncture. So there's no reason for us, to be so precise with these things, like the rules of the temple. That's what it says in the Mordechai. Also Maimoniot, the Samak, right? All these Rishonim. Says the Kolbo, the Aminan Birushalmi, Shaminhag, Lakach Zroa Betza. So as we said, right, the customs nowadays is to take one shank bone, right? Whatever, the drumstick, and one egg. Klomar be'ara chamanan nifrak yitane bedar'a miramima. So he says, right, what's the reason why we have this custom to take a shank bone? Because, right, this symbolizes the outstretched arm of God, right, who's going to save us, redeem us, whatever, right? כתב עוד מנהגנו לעשות צלי מזרוע בהמה זכר לזרוע נטויה. So he says, right, also another thing he writes is that the custom is, right, not to use anything, just, like red meat, right, for this purpose. So the arm, right, we're talking about of some red meat animal, right, like, today the custom is to use lambs, if you can find it, right, that's the best thing to do. But he's talking about red meat in general, right, so it could be also, veal, whatever, right, something like that, whatever. Then solino to b'shipud. So he says we don't, to symbolize the outstretched arm, and he says we don't roast it on a skewer, just on the coals. He says, interesting. Because it's remembrance of the Pesach sacrifice. And it was, done with a skewer, shel rimon, right, which was from the from the tree of the pomegranate tree. Interesting. So if we're gonna be right so precise with that to use the same thing, it's gonna be a big, right, a big nuisance for us, to look for that kind of skewer. Where are you gonna find that, right? Pathmark is not gonna have it, right? Whatever, right? Or some other food chain, right? You're not gonna find it over there, right? And whatever, right? Those places, um, right? Trader Joe's, you're not gonna find it there. So where are you gonna go? Right? You're gonna be spending your whole time like looking for these crazy things. So not really worth it to do that, right? So so it says, we said, right, that the cooked dish we do with an egg, because we're mourning for the destruction of the temple, right? And eggs are mourners' food, right? According to the sages. Some say it's because it's easy to cook, the egg, right? So it's an easy job. Takes 5 minutes, you're done, right? So you don't have to, you don't need a lot of time for that. והם צריכים להביא מכל אלו לפני כל אחד ואחד בפרק הרבה פסחים, right? So it says, right, that as we said, you don't have to give everybody these things, just, the head of the household, you put it in front of him and he, gives it to everybody, apportions it to people. So there's no reason, to put each one like a separate seder plate, what I mean? Each one gets. There are some people, by the way, who have this custom, they give everybody a separate plate, a tray for the seder, so according to this, that's not the way to do it. I mean, you don't have to, let's put it this way, right? There's no need for that. Not that it's forbidden, nothing forbidden about that. And it's also quite a hassle, I mean, to give everybody a separate plate with all these things on it. Okay, good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Finally. Yeah, so as I remember, we read the Shulchan Aruch last time, but maybe we'll just go over it since it's summing up all the stuff that we just read. So as we said, right, the last time we pretty much read it, but we'll go over it again. As we said, right, there's 5 different vegetables which you can use from maror, right? So what are they? Chazeret, right? Number 1 is romaine lettuce, all sheen is endives, right? And then we have the other stuff, right? Which one of them is the horseradish, right? And 2 other ones, which I don't know what they are exactly. They're bitter types of grass, whatever, the bitter types of vegetables, leaves. It says you can use the leaves and also you can use the stalks, right, for these things. But not the roots. Do not use the roots. So as we said, right, that when it comes to the leaves, you can use only the moist ones, right, but not the dry. But when it comes to the stalk, you can use dry or moist, right? Doesn't really matter. It's all good because the flavor is the same. That doesn't really change the flavor. Aval, as we said, right? But don't use pickled, maror, right? And also not cooked, right? So don't cook your lettuce, and then use it. That's not going to be good, right? And don't think you're going to be a wise guy, and cook your horseradish, and then it'll remove the bitterness from it because that's not what we want, right? So don't use pickled, and the cooked stuff. We don't want any of that. That changes the taste of it. Okay, so it says, right, they all combine to make a kazait, as we said, right, which is the minimum amount you have to eat to fulfill your obligation for maror. As we said, right, but the main mitzvah is to use romaine lettuce. If he doesn't have romaine lettuce, then he should use the other ones, right? Each one according to, respectively, right, the priority. Like the order that they're written, right, in the Talmud. So says the Rama, as we said, right, last week, if he doesn't have any of these, the Rama says, then what? Take some kind of, bitter grass, right, like, wormwood, right, or some kind of other bitter vegetable, right, the leaf, whatever, vegetable. So says the right, the Rama, as we just mentioned, that you should make the charoset thick, like muddy. Zecheletit, right, which is reminds you of the clay that they had in Egypt, V'achakach nutnim bo miat chometz, right? Then we put some vinegar in it, as we said, right? Add some vinegar to make it a little bit pungent there, right? And also, as we said, to make it a little bit softer. Or yain adom, or use red wine, right? Zecher adam, which is a remembrance for the blood, right? So, meaning what? That when he's talking about, what do you call it, vinegar, he's talking about red vinegar more, right? Whatever. You get the idea. Because that's gonna, you need that red color. Whatever. So as we said, right, that we use fruits that are the Jewish people are compared to them. When it comes to charoset, so what are they? Tapuchim, right? Apples, tanim, and figs, right? Egozim, right? Which is the nuts, right? Hazelnuts, right? Egoz is really the hazelnut. Rimonim, right? Then we have the pomegranates, shikedim, right? Almonds. We put some spices on it, as we said, right? What are the spices? Cinnamon v'zangbil, right? Cinnamon and ginger. Hadomim leteven, which they resemble, right? Straw, as we said, because they have a rough texture. Right? That's how they used to make the the mud, the clay for the bricks. Okay, very good. So yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff here. So I guess we'll continue Bezat Hashem next time. And we're getting close, to the holiday. So Baruch Hashem, we're going through the Seder over here, what to do to the Seder. I also would like to do, Bezat Hashem, before we finish, right, before we get to the holiday, to do the Bedikat Chametz. You know how to do the checking for the Chametz, right? I want to go through that, Belineder. So remind me, right, that we should do that too. This way, we know how to do it, right? When do we do that, the Bedikah? We do that Sunday night. So we have to know what to do, right? And by the way, because of that Sunday night, probably we should not do a class. Because we're going to be doing the checking of the chametz, that night. So I guess we'll skip the class that night to do the check, because you really got to do it early. If we do the class, it's gonna get stuck right in the middle of our checking, and then we're gonna do it really, really late. It's not really good. You get behind the 8 ball like that. The only thing we can do, maybe, right, if you really, really want, I doubt it'll work out, but we could do after the checking. We could do a class, a little bit later, but I don't know, we'll see what happens. We'll see if that works out, right? I'm not sure if it'll work. You may get tired by then. Okay, so Bezat Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Chazak Laruch, Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
Yeah, pray for Am Yisrael, Bezat Hashem. We had miracles last night, as you know. We had a lot of miracles going on. Hashem, right, provided us with incredible protection. And now we have to hit them back and give them the feeling of just like the Egyptians, of losing. You have to make sure that they lose, just like the Egyptians did. Okay, it's a time of redemption, Bezat Hashem. It's the proper time to defeat our enemies right now, right? No better time than now. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow, Bezat Hashem. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov. Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.